Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be talking to you today about A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. It's the book we're reading for book club in January. And I'm really enjoying it so far. I hope a lot of you are too. And the book basically covers, it starts in 1922 when a 30-year-old gentleman, Count Alexander Rostov, is sentenced to house arrest in a grand hotel. His crime being that he's an unrepentant aristocrat, according to the Bolsheviks. So what follows from there is the story of the life he carves out for himself, living in, at first, a grand hotel in a lovely suite, and then he's demoted to a rather dark and dank attic room. But he manages to maintain a lot of his charm and personality, and we get to meet all the other characters that also reside in the hotel. And a couple things that come to mind. At the beginning of the book, when he returns from his trial and finds out that the good news is he will not be shot by the Bolsheviks, the bad news is he's going to be forced to live in the hotel and is not allowed to leave upon pain of death. He returns to his very lovely suite to find out that he has just a few minutes to gather some things, and he's being moved to what turns out to be a very dark and dank attic room. One of the things that made me think of is, what would each of us bring if, in some nasty twist of fate, you just had a few minutes to gather something from your house? What would you gather? Or gather something from your apartment? What is it that you would think is most important to you, and what would you scoop up? So along those lines, I asked everybody in my department what they would grab. Chris was the most practical person, I think. He said his passport, his phone, some jewelry, and that was it. He's not a very sentimental person. Hilda Lisa said she would take her wallet, family photos, and family letters. Josh said he would take his dog, which I second is a good choice. Sheet music, his Fendi bags, and a handmade quilt that his mom made for him. And I think I might be the most sentimental member of the group. I would take the baby blankets that my mom made for my kids, pictures of my mother, a scarf one of my sisters made for me, and an old super soft but very worn out blanket that has roses on it that my mom used to have on her bed, my father's watch, and a framed letter that I have from my mom. So that's what I would grab. So I thought one of the things that we could do is just everyone could think about what they would grab, and just kind of an interesting exercise to think about which things hold value for you. Sometimes it's something that's intrinsically valuable, like maybe a piece of jewelry. Sometimes it's something that's purely sentimental and just reminds you of a person or a place or a happier time. And there's a nice passage in the book where the Count says, "'Tis a funny thing, from the earliest age we must learn to say goodbye to friends and family, taking comfort from the notion that we will hear word of him soon enough. But experience is less likely to teach us how to bid adieu. We come to hold our dearest possessions more closely than we hold our friends. We carry them from place to place, often at considerable expense and inconvenience, until we imagine that these carefully preserved possessions must give us genuine solace in the face of a lost companion." And I think that's often the case. You may have lost touch with the person, but you have the items that come to signify a lot to you. Another interesting thing I found is when the Count's sort of looking around his very dark, dank room, and realizing that it's really, really small and that he'll have to rearrange the furniture every time he tries to move around the room. And he's clever enough to realize that one room adjoins another room, And so he pokes around and realizes that he can actually break through from his room to the closet of the room next door and make himself a little anteroom. So he does this, and when he's first enjoying that new space that he's made for himself, he turns it into sort of a study or a library. There's a nice passage about that, too. The Count sat down in one of the high-backed chairs and felt an almost surprising sense of bliss. The Count's bedroom and this improvised study had identical dimensions, and yet they exerted a completely different influence on his mood. To some degree, this difference stemmed from the manner in which the two rooms had been furnished. For while the room next door, with its bed, bureau, and desk, remained a realm of practical necessities, the study, with its books, the ambassador, and Helena's portrait, had been furnished in a manner more essential to the spirit. But in all likelihood, a greater factor in the difference between the two rooms was their provenance. For if a room that exists under the governance, authority, and intent of others seems smaller than it is, then a room that exists in secret can, regardless of its dimensions, seem as vast as one cares to imagine. And that made me think often of places where we play when you were a child. You know, you might make a fort, out of blankets and chairs, and usually it seemed to have plenty of space and sort of a magical quality to it that didn't really have anything to do with the sheer square footage that it occupied. So that was another sort of interesting idea, especially these days when lots of folks are working from home, and you'll hear people on NPR saying, well, actually I'm broadcasting out of an old closet, or under the stairs or something like that. So it's just kind of funny how you can take your space and maybe turn it into something much more than just the square footage that it occupies. So another couple things that I thought might be interesting. One were some information about the writer. Amor Towles graduated from Yale and got his master's in English from Stanford. Then he worked in investing in New York City for over 20 years and did quite a bit of traveling. And actually it was during his travels that he got the idea for this book. He said he was in a hotel overseas, and he had stayed there several times in the same hotel and started to recognize some of the people that were there each year or each couple of years when he would visit. And he started to wonder if they lived in the hotel and what it would be like if you ended up living in a hotel. And particularly he thought if you were in a hotel not really by your own choosing, what would that be like? So his first novel was Rules of Civility, that was published in 2011. That was a New York Times bestseller. And A Gentleman in Moscow is his second book, having been published in 2016. And it's also a New York Times bestseller. Both books have been translated into over 15 languages. And he currently lives in New York City with his wife and 2 children. And for anybody who's getting a little bit of cabin fever, or more than a little bit of cabin fever, the Metropole Hotel still stands in the center of Moscow. It's a short walk from Red Square. It's across the street from the Bolshoi Theater. And you could still go stay there today. So I pulled it up to see what it would be like. I have to admit, Moscow would not be my first choice for traveling when all this craziness is over, but after looking at all the pictures of the hotel would really be worth the trip, I think. So it's a 5-star hotel. It has 346 guest rooms, including 71 suites and 18 banquet and meeting rooms. The least expensive suite is the executive suite, which is $251 a night. The executive suite actually reminded me quite a bit of the suite where the Count is originally. It has views of central Moscow and the Bolshoi Theater. It has a bedroom, living room, a working and a dressing area, and antique furniture. And that actually reminded me quite a bit of the room. So that's the executive suite, and that's $384 a night. Then they have the Metropole Hall banquet room with a fountain in the middle of it, which was really quite striking. And also, a lot of this information comes from Amor Towles' site about the book. So if you'd like to go online, you could find it there. And you can just Google the Metropole Hotel, and you can find some of the interesting pictures and things. So the Metropole was the first hotel in Moscow to have hot water and telephones in the rooms, international cuisine in the restaurants, and American bar off the lobby. And in 1917, during a battle between the forces loyal to the Tsar and the Bolsheviks, every window in the hotel was shattered. There's an account by an American journalist, John Reed, who arrived in the city shortly after the battle, and inquiring about a room, the unflappable desk captain said, "We have some very comfortable rooms if the gentleman does not mind a little fresh air." So not really losing their cool in the midst of the hotel being shot to pieces. So after the victory of the Bolsheviks, they decided to return the capital of Russia to Moscow. It had been in St. Petersburg for the 400 years before that. And they didn't have infrastructure to house their new government, so they seized the Metropole, threw out the guests, and renamed it the Second House of the Soviets, and used it to house officials and departments of the new state. That might have ended the Metropole's existence as a grand hotel, but in the 1920s, when they started establishing trade and diplomatic relations with European nations, they realized that people were going to come and visit and get a good impression of the new regime. They needed to have somewhere nice for people to stay. So in order to signal the success of communism, the Bolsheviks relocated their officials and restored the Metropole to its former glory, complete with uniformed bellhops in the lobby, silver service in the restaurants, and American jazz in the bar. And I have to admit, I'm a little curious about the American jazz in the bar, where they managed to find the players for that, and was it any good? I have a feeling maybe it was not very good, but I thought I'd poke around, and if I find out any more about that, I will let you know. Let's see. Another account was by Harrison Salisbury, a correspondent for the New York Times, and in 1944 he was staying at the Metropole, and his room was 393, and he described it as gloomy, cavernous, with a sagging balcony overlooking a dark interior courtyard. His newspaper colleagues noticed that that room was known for being given to journalists, and they said that way they don't have to set up and remove and reset up the microphones all over the hotel. They just give us that room. It's already all set up. He scoffed at this and thought, that couldn't possibly be right. But he lent more credence to this idea when he realized that after he stayed there, the next 3 occupants of room 393 were all newspaper correspondents. So I'm sure his friends were probably right about that. So it's a lovely hotel to this day. Basically, that sort of gives you a little bit of a taste of the beginning of the book. And I'll be coming back to talk to you some more, either here or maybe in person, about the rest of the book. So I'm hoping that everyone is enjoying it. And by all means, feel free to jot down some ideas or some notes of things that maybe struck you about the book. And I'll see if maybe we may try to figure out a way to share those electronically as well. All right, hope everyone's enjoying your reading. Thanks very much. Bye.